Hello, podheads, and welcome to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. This is your host for today, Kate Carter.
And I'm Kylie Cole.
And I'm Holly Spear.
And per usual, ladies, gonna jump right into our case. Not giving you an intro, we're just gonna get into it. This is the case of Blair Adams. So, Robert Dennis Blair Adams, he was born on December 28th, 1964, in Surrey, British Columbia. So, Surrey is this cute, smaller, like suburban town outside of Vancouver. So, just to give you like location wise, it is the second largest population behind Vancouver. So, I guess it's not really that small. Basically, a lot of people lived in Surrey and then would commute to work in Vancouver. So, Blair grew up in a separated family. From what I could tell, he has a few siblings, at least three, but his dad wasn't really in the picture. And then his mom remarried at some point to Blair's stepdad, who owned a construction company that was based out of Germany. And that's pretty much all I know about their family. It's really kept quiet over the years, and you'll kind of see why. Blair's mom said that growing up, Blair was this kind hearted soul. He was super ambitious. He loved to be around people. But unfortunately, Blair's reputation kind of said the opposite. The kid growing up in high school was really known to the local police department. He had been arrested on multiple occasions for assaults and drug possessions. Now, I was able to find that most of his assaults stemmed from bar fights, it seems like. So he would get really drunk and then end up fighting someone and then would always get arrested for it. But as for the drug possession charges, I was never able to tell exactly like what drug or drugs he was using. So just kind of keep that in mind. But in 1994, when he was 30 years old, Blair decided to get sober and he started going to AA meetings. He was pretty good and like religious at going to his AA meetings. So kudos to you, Blair. Blair would maintain for the rest of his life that he was always sober and never went back to his partying and drinking lifestyle. During his sober year, Blair entered into a few relationships here and there, but nothing really stuck. I found this article that his mom had commented on. She didn't write it, she had commented on it, saying that Blair was once in a relationship with his male roommate. That obviously, like, if your mom's saying that, that kind of gives me the vibes like you might like the same sex, but anything else on the entire internet said otherwise. So I couldn't find anything that said like Blair was ever gay or into guys. So I don't really know what the truth is with it. I don't really think it matters, but just kind of keep that in your head.
I don't know if your guy's mom did this, but had to ask if you were a lesbian because you hung out with your best friend too much.
Yes. Other than that comment from his mom, he was known to date around, but nothing really like stuck. So a year later, remember Blair's stepdad owns a construction company that's run out of Germany. So Blair in 1995 got a job working for his stepdad's company and he moved to Germany. So at some point while he was in Germany, Blair attended a party with like some coworkers and he met his girlfriend there. I couldn't find the name of his girlfriend anywhere. There's a few names in this story that like every article would just be like unknown girlfriend, like unknown name of girlfriend, stuff like this. And I'm like, did she exist? Was she real? I just never understand when there's not names for things because it's not like she's not suspicious at all. So don't know why her name's not out there.
Germany has very strict privacy laws. Like even if someone's like convicted of murder, they don't even release the murderer's name.
Oh, maybe that's it. There you go. You learn something new. So the girlfriend would later come out to say, like, she knew Blair as this gentleman type and he was a wonderful human. But just like going back to his younger like years, Blair kind of had a different reputation and especially at work. So some of his fellow employees would say like the opposite. They said he was quite rude, he was very confrontational, and that he often liked to pick fights. So it's like these kind of there's like these two sides to Blair that like people saw, specifically like women and men. So the women always saw him as this like kind and caring dude, and the guys always were like he picked fights with everybody. A year later, Blair left Germany and returned back to Surrey. And that's when Blair's family and friends said they noticed a really big change in him. Like he came back a completely different person. He was completely sober and very open minded, and he was very dedicated to turning his life around. He was still working for his stepdad, just working at their Surrey office. And he was saving up a bunch of money. He was doing good for himself. And he hadn't gotten into any trouble since he had left for Germany, which is nice. But in July of 1996, things started to slowly change for Blair, and everyone noticed. It's almost like he started to become this paranoid individual. He basically didn't want to leave his house. He started telling people that someone was trying to kill him. And this switch up was very out of the norm. From what people knew, Blair didn't suffer from any mental illnesses, which we know doesn't matter what people say because sometimes they're internal, but that he was still sober and attending his AA meetings. But that all changed. At the very end of the summer in 1996, Blair abruptly stopped going to his AA meetings. He stopped leaving his house. He eventually quit his job after he started slacking too much. And he wasn't showing up to like family and friend invites and events. So, kind of all these things that like Blair came back from Germany, he was doing great. And then out of nowhere, things like changed on the drop of a dime. Within weeks, it seems like this hardworking, sober, dedicated man was like slowly, condemning himself to his house. To most people, Blair told them, like, oh, I'm just really tired. I don't sleep that much anymore. But to his close friends and family members, they knew that Blair had told him someone was out to kill him and like someone was blackmailing him. He never went into detail about it. Like, even his girlfriend could not tell you like who it was or anything like that. So there wasn't like any extent or circumstances that like Blair talked about. On July 5th, 1996, Blair withdrew all of the money that he had from his bank account and he took out all of the valuables he had in his bank's deposit box. Some of the things that he had in his deposit box were like very valuable jewelry that had been passed down for generations, expensive sunglasses, lots of cash, and he even had a few bars of gold, which is cool. I don't even know how you get bars of gold anymore, but or like how much is a bar? Like how much is a bar of gold?
Today, $3,500.
Okay, so he just for like visual purposes, he had a few of them. So like he had a good chunk of money like saved up in his deposit box. And then he had also taken out all of the cash that was in his bank account, which was about $10,000. If I had to guess, I don't know, but I'm just saying if I had to guess, I would think like maybe 30 grand is like what he had on him now, like with all of his valuables and stuff. Right after he took all of this stuff out of his bank, he called his mom and said that like something was bothering him and he was going to go on a road trip to go visit his uncle. Blair's uncle lives in a place called Courtney, which is still in British Columbia. It was only about a 4-hour drive from where Blair lives in Surrey. But 2 days later, on July 7th, Blair arrived in the town of Victoria, British Columbia, and he attempted to get onto a ferry that was heading for Seattle. But Blair got flagged down by immigration for suspicious circumstances. So I say attempted because it didn't work. First off, Blair was a single man traveling by himself with a crazy amount of cash and valuables on him. So immigration was like, he's probably a drug smuggler or doing something illegal. And then to make matters worse, when they asked him if he had any criminal history, he lied and said no, even though he had been convicted multiple times. So immigration obviously denied him access to the ferry and basically just said, like, turn around, send you on your way. Obviously, he did not go to his uncle's house like he told his mom. Blair then decided to switch up the road trip a little bit. And on his way back home, he visited a few friends in different towns, including his girlfriend, who now lived in Canada. And he also visited his mom back in Surrey. So when he was talking to his girlfriend and his mom, he told them about how he was quitting his job and he wanted to go to the US and that's what he was trying to do right now. But he told them that he specifically was going to the US to see the Summer Olympic Games, which was being hosted in Atlanta because this was 1996. And just if you guys remember, this was the Olympic Games that had the bombs planted by Eric Rudolph, right? I think. And that ended up killing 2 people and injuring like hundreds more or something like that. So just a weird now it has nothing to do with the rest of the story, but that's just a weird scenario that ended up happening. So when Blair was visiting his other friends, he actually would break down and tell them that he was trying to flee to the US because someone was after him and trying to kill him. So like there was 2 versions. Everyone knew that Blair was being paranoid, but only his girlfriend and his mom knew that he was trying to go to the Olympic Games. Okay, so on the same day that Blair was denied access to that ferry heading for Seattle, before he made his rounds to like his family and friends, he actually went to a travel agency before all of it and booked a round trip tickets to Frankfurt in Germany. And then a few hours later, he called the agency and told them to cancel the trip because the person he bought them for got sick. Now, remember at this like point in time, Blair is dating the German woman who's in Canada, but she would later say like they had no plans on going to Germany. She's not from Frankfurt. They would have flown somewhere else. And that like it just didn't make sense of why he booked and canceled the trip. And then he tried to get on the ferry to Seattle. So like already some weird stuff happening. At some point, Blair did speak to his girlfriend and he told her more specifics about what he was scared about and that he was not just trying to run away to the Olympic Games, but that some of his former coworkers who he worked with in Germany, you know, the ones that called Blair violent and aggressive, they're now back in Canada from Germany. And he was afraid of running into them, which is like kind of odd because you'd think the opposite, you know, since it seems like Blair was more of the bully back in Germany. Like it doesn't really make sense that his former coworkers are after him. I mean, unless some shit happened over there that like we don't know about, which obviously could have. So the next day, July 8th, no one heard or saw Blair. And then on July 9th, Blair was actually stopped once again and detained by police when he attempted to cross the US Canada border on foot. Apparently, he was originally stopped not because he was crossing the border on foot, but because he matched the description of someone who is wanted for an auto theft. This auto theft had been of a stolen blue car out of Canada, and this blue car had ended up being like ditched not too far from the US Canada border. And so apparently Blair like fit the description of the dude. But police weren't able to tie anything to Blair from the theft. So they were just like, look, you look suspicious. Maybe just like stay in Canada for now. So he got denied once again into the US. But what's interesting is that later on, a friend would come out and say that same day, they swear they saw Blair driving around town, but he wasn't in his car. He was in a blue car that they didn't recognize. Just saying.
I think it's plausible that he stole the blue car.
Yes. It'll get more plausible too that he stole the blue car. Also, something to mention too, this has to do with it. That same morning, Blair had parked his car at the Vancouver airport and then tried to cross the border on foot. And at some point, he goes and rents a Nissan Altima and then finally is able to drive across the US border and into Seattle. So now he's in the US.
It took him many tries.
A few times. Blair is now in the US. He's in Seattle. And once he got to Seattle, he went to the airport and he did the exact same thing he did in Vancouver. He dropped his rental car off at the Seattle airport, but this time he went inside and he purchased a one-way ticket to Washington, D.C. Now, what was odd about this is that at the time, for some reason, because this never makes sense, but it happens, a round trip ticket to DC was actually cheaper than the one-way price. And so he ended up spending an extra $800 on the one-way ticket. Not sure why. Maybe once again, he's like trying to get someone off of his path or tracking him, but he did. The next day, on Wednesday, July 10th, Blair landed in Washington, D.C. at 6 a.m. So he had taken a overnight flight, a red eye. And at 6:45 a.m., he rented another car, a Toyota Camry, from a local store, and he started driving towards Knoxville, Tennessee. DC to Knoxville is about a 7-hour drive. And something to also note is that Blair's flight from Seattle, like I said, was a red eye. So he spent the night on the plane and then immediately rented a car and began driving. So I can only imagine, and doing a 7-hour drive, I can only imagine he's fucking exhausted at this point. I would be dead. So he's obviously like in a rush, you know, to get to where he wants to go. And if his final destination was indeed like Atlanta, like for the Olympic Games, like he said, why would he not have just flown into Atlanta? He's bouncing around a lot. If someone's trying to kill him, is he doing all of this to like get him off his track? Lots of rental cars, flight tickets, weird things. And he has all of his possessions with him. So on his way to Tennessee, Blair accidentally backed his rental car into another car. And fortunately for Blair, it caused minor damage. But the other driver later said that Blair was very nice about the whole situation, but that he could tell Blair was in some type of hurry to like get away. Later that day, around 5 p.m., Blair was seen on security footage at a gas station attempting to fill his rental car up. Now, I say attempted once again, because at some point Blair left his car and went inside the gas station. And when he came back out, he was unable to open the car door. It was locked. And the key that he had wasn't working. So Blair's like freaking out. He called a car repair service man, like a tow guy, who met him at the gas station to help him get into the car. But once the worker arrived, the worker noticed, like, dude, you're not using the right key to get into this car. Like, how did you drive this car? It turns out he was using the key for one of his other rentals that he had dropped off at the airport. The key to get into the car was probably in the car and it was locked. He never returned those rental cars, so he never returned the keys. So he just has like 3 keys basically on him right now. But Blair is like freaking out at this guy and is like telling him like, no, this is the right key, like you're wrong. And the guy was like trying to calm him down and said, empty your pockets, like make sure you don't have any other keys on you. And so Blair was seen on the security cameras emptying his pockets and they were empty. When I read this in an article, I read that when the worker originally told Blair to empty his pockets, the Blair was refusing to do so because he was like pissed off in the situation. Like he swore he was right up and down. Blair seemed really upset about everything, even though the employee kind of knew like this is the wrong key. So I'm not really sure like what to believe in that situation, but it just know he had the wrong key. So after not finding the other keys, the employee, whose name was Gerald, offered to tow Blair's rental car and take Blair back to a local hotel. So once at a local hotel, Blair immediately hopped out of the truck, left all of his belongings in Gerald's car. And fortunately, the employee was a good guy because it was just a bunch of cash and gold, saw that Blair had forgotten all of his things and drove it over to Blair before he entered the hotel. Gerald would later recall that he thought Blair wasn't just all the way there. He didn't seem like he was on drugs or anything, but he said that something was definitely off. And it seems like maybe Blair was having a mental episode. Once at the hotel, which was a Fairfield Inn, before even getting a room assignment, Blair was seen on the hotel's security camera going in and out of the back of the hotel about 8 times within a 30-minute period, which is very odd. He hadn't even checked in, and the dude was just like walking in and out of the hotel, like it pretty much looked like he was pacing back and forth. So once he finally did get a room for the night, he gave the hotel clerk $100 bill and like put it on the desk and just ran off. Like the room cost less than the $100, so the clerk like went to go give Blair his change and he was gone. He was basically like running down the hallway towards the hotel room. The hotel clerk even tried to knock on Blair's room and call it a few times, but Blair never answered. So we actually don't know. Like there's no footage of Blair ever entering his hotel room. So we don't know if Blair ever actually used his room, to be honest. Like we don't know if he went inside. So after the hotel clerk saw him that night, that was it. There are no more sightings of Blair. Now, I do want to include this though. There were a few other occasions that people said they saw Blair, but the police basically like ruled them out and said, no, that didn't happen. But I want to tell you about the instances anyways, because I think it's, important. So one of them came from some employees at a truck stop in a town called Dandridge, Tennessee. These employees, like once the case got out later, said that they had saw Blair at the truck stop that same night around 9 to 10 p.m. and that Blair was sitting there at the stop looking at magazines and was at some point also talking to an unknown man about Canadian money. But the police at some point ruled this sighting out because this particular truck stop was about a 25 to 30-minute drive from the hotel that Blair was at. And just remember, like, Blair didn't have a car, it had been towed. So unless he took a taxi there or a bus, like Ubers weren't a thing, and he definitely didn't walk because that wouldn't fit the timeline. Another sighting, which I actually think is a little bit more plausible, like I don't really know why they ruled this one out, but was from a worker at Cracker Barrel, which was in walking distance from the Fairfield Inn. Apparently, this woman said she saw Blair eating a late night dinner with an unknown man. And when the police tried to get a composite sketch done from the employee's viewpoint, her descriptions kept changing of what the two men looked like. Basically, I think that's the reason that the police discounted this account, which kind of sucks. And once they couldn't get an accurate description, they basically decided not to look into it any further. but it was walking distance from the hotel. And she said it was really late at night and he was eating, which would make sense because he hadn't stopped to eat all day. So I think that one might be a little true. I'm not sure. But the next day, on July 11th, 1996, a sighting of Blair happened that obviously had to be accounted for. There were some construction workers who had arrived to work on that July 11th morning across the street from the Fairfield Inn Hotel. And when the employees got to their job site, they saw a man across the street at the hotel laying face down in the ground. Now, when they saw that guy laying face down, they actually assumed it was just like a homeless man sleeping. They were in a very like rural area. There wasn't any traffic going on. This hotel was kind of off the highway just on its own, but they still, good for them, decided to walk across the street and check on the man. Instead of finding a homeless man like they thought they had, they actually found Blair Adams deceased, and he was covered in American and Canadian money. Not only was he dead, but he was also found naked from the waist down with his pants and socks being laid out next to him. Both of them were turned inside out. Blair's keys, along with assumingly his unused hotel key, were on the ground a few feet away. And as for Blair's shoes, both were off of his feet. One was next to him on the ground, and the other one was under Blair's head, almost as if it had been used as a pillow. And next to Blair's head was his large black duffel bag that he had been traveling with. Inside this bag, investigators found out printed maps, all of his travel purchase receipts, a bunch of gold bars, his gold and silver jewelry from Canada, a set of car keys, which assumably came from the rental car that he didn't know about, and some sunglasses. So basically everything he left Canada with was found in that bag. After the autopsy report came back from Blair, it revealed that he had taken a major hit to his stomach, which actually had ruptured his stomach and eventually sent him into septic shock. And not only that, but some type of weapon was used against the top of his head on his forehead, and it had sliced open his forehead, but wasn't the way that he had died. He had died from the septic shock, but the weapon used against his head was most likely from a crowbar, they think. Blair's hands were pretty bloody and bruised as well, which showed the investigators that he had tried to put up a fight against his attacker. And Blair was also missing chunks of hair from the top of his head as if it had been ripped out. So poor Blair's, the dude is really beaten up. Something I do want to mention, because this is really important, and especially for his family and friends, is that in Blair's autopsy report, there were no drugs or alcohol found in his system. So for everyone who was thinking that maybe he had gone off the rails, started drinking or using drugs again because he had stopped going to his AA meetings, his autopsy proved differently, which in a way is a good thing, but also doesn't help the story,
Just makes it more weird.
So remember Gerald, the tow truck guy who helped Blair out? So apparently police were able to like track down Gerald. And when they told him about Blair and how they found him, Gerald was apparently very upset and had a hard time finishing his interview. And a few days later went and quit his job as well, which is a little interesting. I feel like you could think of that in like two different viewpoints, either very suspiciously, like Gerald had something to do with it. Maybe Gerald killed Blair, but he was never seen entering back on the hotel property, which it doesn't really mean too much, because what also sucks is that where Blair's body was found was not in the footage area. So even though he was outside of the hotel, you couldn't see what had happened to Blair. So maybe Gerald had something to do with it, or, he had said like he thought Blair was having a mental episode. So maybe Gerald literally just did feel so much guilt about like not helping him in the moment, especially if someone's going through something while you're already helping them. Should he have called the cops? Should he have done something else? So, but I think it's weird that he did quit his job.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards the latter option because he would have, if he wanted to have killed Blair, he had plenty of opportunity in the tow truck.
Right. He didn't need to do it at the hotel.
Yeah.
Because he would have had to come back to do it, because the footage sees him being dropped off.
Yeah.
So, and then get this. So around 3 a.m. from the night before, a security guard at the hotel recalled hearing a really loud, high-pitched scream coming from outside. And when the security guard went outside, he didn't see anyone, but he went and investigated anyways, and he didn't find anybody outside. He did say that the screams was so high pitched it sounded like a woman, but obviously like that doesn't really mean anything in the moment. And the police believe the scream came from Blair, and then that this could have been the timing when he had been murdered. So around 3 to 3:30 a.m. During Blair's autopsy, a long hair was found in Blair's right hand and it was grasped really tight. Investigators were unable to figure out whose hair the strand belonged to because it didn't have the root, but they assumed because of the length it came from a woman, which I don't really think is correct, but in their minds they were like, it's so long, it definitely came from a woman. So that's just on their end. But here's a fun fact for you. At the time of Blair's murder in 1996, Tennessee was actually one of the few states that did not actively collect DNA samples from incarcerated persons within their state. So they didn't end up adopting that policy until the following year. So when they did get the hair from Blair's case, what we do know is because that hair was placed in the system the next year, is Blair's killer was never incarcerated after 1996. So like that kind of narrows it down to a point.
Not much.
No, not much, but still interesting. As for theories on Blair's death, so the one that the police ended up looking at the most, which at first I was like, okay, that's a really crazy idea to like get a hold of. But the more that I've thought about it, the more I think it might have been a little bit more plausible, is that they were thinking that Blair was the victim of a sex crime that maybe turned deadly. They thought that Blair had been a victim of sexual assault before he was killed, which is interesting because other than him being found naked from the waist down, I couldn't find anything else or anything from the autopsy reports showing that he had been sexually assaulted. Doesn't mean he wasn't. I just couldn't find it. And maybe they did and they just didn't want to release that information. We never know about that kind of stuff. So another reason investigators could have come up with this theory is due to the location as well. The hotel that Blair was at was in a remote location. It was off the highway. It was near a truck stop. The police had seen sex crimes there in the past. It was known to be like a place for hookers. So one thing I do find suspicious about this theory, or basically any theory, is the fact that Blair was found with all of his personal belongings and all of his money. So like you would just think if he had been attacked, robbed, a victim of a sex crime, wouldn't the attacker take the money or like the gold bars or the jewelry? Like everything was left there and like money was spread in the air, like all over. Like it was just a very weird scene to think of like he had been robbed or something like that.
Especially by a hooker. I mean, no offense to sex
Right.
workers, but the ones that tend to frequent truck stops usually need a little money.
Right.
Be hard to imagine somebody that would kill him and not just take the things around him if they were so convenient, like spread out.
Especially because it was a lot too.
Yeah.
Like at least take some of it. Well, and I guess that is one thing too, is we don't actually know how much stuff Blair had on him. We know the 10,000 from his bank account, but we don't really know how much was in the safety deposit box. So like maybe some money was taken and we just don't know. But according to like the police, it was all of his possessions. Like it didn't look like anything had been taken. There is another theory that Blair was in a car with someone at some point, and either while the car was moving, Blair either jumped out with his bag or he was thrown out of the car, which could have caused the head injury, like him just hitting his head on something maybe sharp on the ground. And then he was hit by the car, which could have easily caused the blow to the stomach. I
But
also say that this is kind of more explanatory of why all of his belongings were just thrown all over the place, looking like he got hit by a car, but it doesn't explain why his clothes were off and inside out or why his head was propped up by one of the shoes. But I have my own theory. I kind of want to mesh the two together. I think just basing this off of, and I hate that I'm thinking this because if I'm wrong, like I'm sorry to Blair's family and friends and to Blair for coming up with this conclusion, but like this is something that I think is plausible. his mom mentioning that Blair had dated one of his male roommates before just makes me think, and the world didn't know about it, makes me think he was closeted. Okay. So while Blair was at the Fairfield Inn, he met someone somehow, or maybe he knew someone there, but he met someone in the area. And I think that woman at Cracker Barrel did see two guys eating dinner at Cracker Barrel. And I think it was Blair. I think it was a Blair and an unknown dude. And when the unknown dude was driving Blair back to the hotel, Blair maybe tried to pull out some things on him. I say that like maybe the two of them were going to get into a sexual relationship of some sort and something went wrong and the other guy maybe refused or got pissed off or something like that. And so like Blair's clothes were already off. That would kind of makes a little bit more sense. And so when Blair got out of the car, which he either could have jumped, he knew he was in danger, or he was thrown out of the car, him getting hit by the car would make sense for the stomach being ruptured. Because if you think about it, like getting punched to the stomach would not rupture your stomach. It would have to be something so heavy to hit you hard enough. Getting hit by a car, I feel like could be a really good answer. And that would also make sense of why all of Blair's shit in his duffel bag was just all over the place. Now, the shoe under Blair's head, I don't have a reasoning for that. My only thought is, as someone who has seen enough shows where people have been in septic shock, you don't act normal. And maybe Blair's shoes had already been off and near him when he was laying on the ground, that he propped his head up like a pillow or something, like, like that's just the only thing I could think of. But that's kind of my thought, is that it was a meetup gone wrong after dinner or food, because that also kind of explains of why he wasn't robbed.
I know, like with sepsis and stuff, you do get like delirium. Do we know how far away from like the road or sidewalk his body was?
He was found in the hotel parking lot, but on the other side where there was no security camera.
Well, like a car could drive over
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
I mean, is it possible he was hit by a car, I mean, accidentally or on purpose, and just, I don't know, took his clothes off? But then, like, we don't really
Yeah.
know the signs of sexual assault they're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to say that I agree with a car theory of some sort. Like, I feel like that would make the most sense with the stomach being injured and then his shit just being thrown all over the place.
But could you, I mean, so you don't think that you could get hit hard enough, like in the right spot to rupture anything in your stomach?
I don't know. I don't even know if a grown man's punch to the stomach would rupture your stomach. I don't know. I don't think so.
I think the car theory is coming from if he was hit with like, I think like a crowbar, something heavy metal could possibly do that. But then I think there would be like, obviously
Marks.
like crowbar marks of some sort.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe
Yeah.
it's just like one big
Force.
And that's why they think car.
And like also if he had gotten, let's say he got punched, it would be an area. Like his whole stomach probably wouldn't be black. It would just be a certain area. I don't know. It's just all of it's very suspicious.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's just weird circumstances, all of it. But I kind of feel like I want to believe the Crackle Barrel lady with the whole like eating dinner, because that would make sense. He hadn't eaten all day. Okay, so if you remember though, when Blair first started showing signs of being paranoid back in Canada, he had told people that he was being followed and someone wanted to kill him. And at some point he did mention that this person or persons could potentially be former coworkers that he worked with while he was in Germany. Now, when he was in Germany, many of his former coworkers of Blair said that Blair was the aggressive one and that he always just was so tense and angry. But when Blair first arrived home from Germany, he was this new dude. Like he was happy, carefree, good worker, sober, everything. So the idea that something changed within those few months of him being home seems like, with his coworkers wanting to get him at like months after he was home, seems a little far-fetched to me. But it does play into the role of like him wanting to flee Canada because they were coming back to Canada. And the fact that Blair took such a weird route to get to where he was going, it definitely seems like he was trying to get someone off of his track. The whole situation's just really kind of odd, and it does seem like he was trying to get somewhere. But to me, at least, I would say that I don't think any of his former coworkers had anything to do with his murder, but I obviously don't know all of the circumstances. But something I do want to mention that kind of has to do with his coworkers in a way is while looking into this story, there was a good old a Reddit page comment, because we love our Reddit here. I usually don't include shit like that in a podcast, but this one was pretty good. Is that one of the comments said that in the 1900s, there was this act of disrespect that would be done by German mobs or gangs. And basically, that like when a German mobster or gangster killed someone, they would take off their victim's pants and turn them inside out and leave them by the body and to be found. And it was this sign of like showing disrespect for their victim even further than just killing them, being like, oh, we sexually assaulted him as well. Now, that being said, Googled that, found nothing of the sort, never heard of that one before. So I don't really want to play too much into it, but just thought I'd shout out our Reddit.
I mean, I can't imagine if he did something so horrible to his coworkers in Germany that they would want to kill him over. We don't even know about this incident or incidents other than him just being, I guess, rude.
Yeah.
And then if someone was following him and tracking him, it's not like he had any sort of plan. Everything is just kind of spur of the moment. Also, they wouldn't have figured out he was at the hotel.
Unless they were literally like in a car behind him. I'm leaning towards more of a theory he met someone and something went wrong because of the whole pants being off situation. If he had his pants on, then I would be like, he just got hit by a car. Like that's what, like kind of situation. But I think the whole Crackle Barrel pants being off, shit was thrown everywhere, something went wrong, and he got hit by a car and the person fled. That also kind of includes why he didn't get robbed, because the person obviously wasn't trying to kill him and then something happened, so okay, so Blair Adams was buried back in Surrey in Canada in a place called Victory Memorial Park, which his mother ended up being buried beside him a few years ago in 2020 when she passed away. Blair's murder case is actually still considered an open case, even though it is a cold case, since it occurred in 1996 when Blair was 31 years old. So unfortunately, anytime reporters or investigators talked to Blair's family about the case moving forward after it occurred, they weren't really too helpful, but I'm also not too sure like how they could have been more helpful. They didn't have any information. There was like no evidence whatsoever. So to them, to Blair's family, it was, quote, a pipe dream, end quote, for the case to be closed one day, which has got to be really sad, knowing like you're probably never going to figure out what happened to your son. And he died in a horrific manner, So as for the investigators and police on this case, there is still one main detective down in Knoxville who works on Blair's case to this day, but as evidence has definitely dwindled over the years, so have the expectations that the murder or murderers will ever be found. To our listeners, if you have any information regarding the death of Blair Adams from 1996, please do call the Knoxville County Cold Case Unit, which can be called at 865-215-2675, or you can email them at coldcase@knox.sheriff.org. And that is the unusual and abrupt ending to my case today, the case of Blair Adams.
I think this is your second unsolved case?
Look at me.
Very proud.
Thank you.
Another one that's gonna send me down the rabbit hole later.
Yes. It's a weird case because there's truly not a lot of information on it and there's no evidence.
We don't even know if this was like murder or accident or
accident. Yeah.
Those bug me, I think, a little bit more than what unsolved murders is an unsolved death that you don't even know if it's a murder.
Or my personal pet peeve is when they can't determine the cause of death.
Yeah.
You're like, how? Or they say it's a suicide and it's not a suicide. Yeah,
those are so frustrating.
No, and then coupled with him acting weird the months beforehand. Nothing makes sense.
No. When I first started looking into the case, I was like, he got back on drugs, but nothing was found in his system. He thought someone was coming after him, and who knows, literally maybe someone did come after him and they got him. And that's just what happened. But as of right now, we do not know. I don't know if we ever will know, but that's a very sad ending for his family. Do you guys have anything for overtime today?
Do you have like a protocol for how often you shave your legs or for what certain events you shave your legs for? Every girl has a different shaving protocol.
Holly looks very interested in this subject.
Yes. Okay. I know someone who shaves their legs daily.
That's insane.
I feel like my protocol is to save up a little bit.
A hibernation method.
Yeah, I want
like
it to be like worth it.
exactly. And I just feel like you get a smoother shave when you're not shaving stubble all the time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yes.
And it keeps your hair softer. I don't know that to be true, but I do feel like it's true.
Ever since I got pregnant, I noticed my leg hair coming in dark, and that's like one of my biggest fears. And so I was looking this morning and I was like, dear God, you can just see all of the hair on the bottom of my legs. And I swear to God, I only shaved a few days ago. I am like you, Holly. I like to save up a little bit.
I have dark hair, never been pregnant, but it is jet black. In the winter, I let it go. I don't give a shit. If I know the legs are gonna be out, I will shave. In the summer, I'll let it get a little stubbly.
Right.
But
Especially because in Florida, we don't wear sweats all the time in the summer.
yeah, I mean, I also don't really leave my house that much, so if I have hairy legs out at the house, I don't care. But I get ingrown hairs so much that I just hate doing it.
Yeah.
I'm the same with you, Kylie. I get ingrown hairs and I also get rashes. And so that's something I've been trying to, as I've gotten older. I don't know. Do you guys use shaving cream?
Yes.
I use like this shaving oil stuff.
Okay. So that might be, I've never used shaving cream or oil. I
It's
just
actually
wet
pretty
legs and shave.
That's probably why you're getting razor
oh,
rash.
no.
Probably why.
Yeah.
I do have a
Everywhere.
confession.
Yeah.
I do shave my arms, like my actual arms,
I knew that about you.
every day. I can't bring myself to shave my legs, but the arms have to be completely bald at all times, or I will have
Now,
a attack.
I feel like
Have
you
you
have
gotten
to do it
into
every day.
have you gotten yourself into a bad routine of it and now you can't get out of it? You know, like you can't not shave your arms because it gets too stubbly.
Yes, and there's a story behind that. When I was like 12, my mom came home from the store, with razors and said, it's time for you to start shaving. I guess she thought I looked like a little gorilla or something. And she goes, "Don't forget to do your arms." And I
So
came
yeah.
downstairs and I was like, "Look at my bald arms. Look how nice." And she goes, "I meant your armpits." And I was like, "Well, you didn't clarify that." And so now it's been 16 years of me shaving my arms.
Because once you do it, you're kind of stuck because otherwise it's really prickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very noticeable.
Communication is important. Yeah.
I need clear instructions next time.
Yeah. That's all you're asking for.
Exactly.
You never know what you're going to hear on Over My Dead Pod when it comes to overtime, but today's episode's brought to you by Gillette Razors. No, really, anyone want to sponsor us, please reach out. Please reach out. And with that, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. If you want even more information about our case from today, check us out on our website at overmydeadpod.com or on any of our social medias at Over My Dead Pod. Thank you for listening. We love you guys very much. Like, subscribe, comment, and we will see you next week for another episode. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.